My name is Julia Monroe, and when I was 9, my parents punished me for something I didn't do, while my cousins giggled and watched. My brother Ethan tried to protect me, but that moment branded something quiet but lasting on my heart. In this house, fairness didn't always live. Now, years later, on the edge of Ethan's wedding, that same old injustice is about to crack wide open. And this time, I won't be the one swallowing my voice. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. It was the kind of July afternoon that glows golden in memory, if only the memory weren't so bitter. Texas heat shimmered through the windows of our childhood home, bouncing off the polished wood floor like liquid light. I was 9, standing frozen in our sunlit living room, cheeks hot, not from the weather, but from humiliation. The shattered lamp lay in pieces on the rug, and my mother, Donna Monroe, arms folded, stood glaring down at me as though I'd personally taken a hammer to it. "Do you even care about anything in this house, Julia?" she snapped, her voice shrill with disappointment. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to say it wasn't me. I wanted to scream it. But across the room, my cousins Lee and Madeline, both older, both always a little smug, stood huddled together by the couch, stifling laughter behind their hands. The kind of laughter you think adults are too distracted to notice. They'd been playing tag inside, reckless and breathless, and I'd begged them not to run through the living room. They hadn't listened. And when the lamp tipped and shattered, they'd gone silent. Like it was some unspoken pact, blame Julia. She's always so dramatic anyway. My dad, Henry Monroe, came in from the garage, took one look at the scene, and sighed like I'd personally ruined his whole weekend. That's when Ethan appeared. He was 11 back then, tall for his age and already showing signs of the quiet protectiveness that would one day define him. He had his baseball glove slung over one shoulder and dirt on his knees, but his eyes burned clear with anger. "It wasn't her," he shouted, stepping between me and our parents. "Julia didn't do it." He pointed at Lee and Madeline, who stiffened under the sudden spotlight. I remember the moment exactly. My brother's voice slicing through the heavy silence, my mother's hesitation, and then came the shrug, the brushing off. "It doesn't matter who did it," she said. "Julia was the one closest. She should have stopped them." Punished not for what I did, but for where I stood. For being quiet when I should have shouted. For being afraid to point fingers when they were already aimed at me. And as my parents turned away, still muttering about consequences and broken things, Ethan leaned close to me and whispered, "I saw everything. I believe you." Those words, "I believe you." They were everything in a moment where nothing else made sense. But they didn't save me from the grounding, from missing out on the family barbecue that night, or from crying into my pillow while the sounds of laughter floated in through my window. Even then, I knew. Injustice in a family doesn't scream. It whispers. It molds you, teaches you to fold small to make room for others. That summer, something shifted inside me. I became the girl who kept quiet, who avoided conflict, who learned to hold her breath rather than risk being too much. Years passed. We grew up, moved on. But that moment never left me. It waited buried in the corners of my memory like a match tucked in dry grass until the day Ethan brought her home. And that old injustice stirred again, ready to burn brighter than ever. The dining room had changed. Where once there'd been dark wood and lace runners, my mother had swapped in pale gray walls, industrial light fixtures, and a modern oak table with sharp, clean lines. It felt colder now, less like home, more like a magazine spread trying too hard. I sat at one end, a bottle of chilled Riesling sweating into the linen napkin beside me. Across the table, Amanda smiled politely at something Ethan had said, though her eyes didn't smile with her. Not once. She was beautiful. No one could deny that. A kind of effortless, curated beauty, skin like silk, dark hair parted neatly down the middle, lips painted in a color I could never wear without looking ridiculous. Her voice was soft and careful, like someone always measuring how much space she's allowed to take up, or how much space she wants to deny you. Ethan was glowing. His arm around her chair, his words full of inside jokes she barely chuckled at. And I was trying not to drown in the undertow of something I couldn't name yet. "So, Amanda," I said with my best Sunday voice, "what's your favorite part about living in Dallas so far?" She didn't look up from her plate. After a pause that dragged too long, she murmured, "Well, there's good coffee." That was it, good coffee. "Maybe Julia can take you to that place on Oak Lawn," Ethan offered, nudging her gently. "She knows all the hidden gems." Amanda blinked. "I think I'm okay, babe." The word babe hung in the air like perfume with too much musk. Possessive, final, dismissive, I smiled tightly and took a slow sip of wine. My mother swooped in, cheerful as ever. "Amanda, tell Julia about your job search. She's such a go-getter, our Julia, she might know someone." Amanda's fork paused midair. "Oh, I'm not looking right now. We decided I'd just focus on the wedding for now." My mother's eyes flicked briefly to mine, an old, habitual twitch of comparison. I'd once taken a week off to help plan a charity gala and was told I was wasting potential. Amanda, it seemed, could pause her entire career and be praised for focus. "I see," I said, not trusting myself with more. The rest of the dinner blurred. My father talked about lawn maintenance. My mother bragged about a lemon tart recipe she'd copied from a food blogger and swore was completely original. Ethan kept trying to lighten the mood, but every time he laughed too loudly at something I said, Amanda's hand found his knee under the table like a subtle anchor. The undercurrent had become undeniable. She didn't like me. She didn't say it, of course. No one ever says it directly in a family setting. But it was there, in the stiff smiles, in the way her sentences died when I entered the room, in the lack of follow-up when I shared something about myself. 1,000 small cuts that were never sharp enough to name. At one point, I offered to help clear the table. Amanda rose too, not to help, but to walk past me and murmur, "Don't worry about it, you've done enough." Done enough, I turned, startled, but she was already out of the room. Later, as we gathered in the living room, Amanda sat curled next to Ethan like a figure in a painting, picture perfect and strategically silent. I tried to meet her eyes once. She looked past me as though I were part of the furniture. The silence between us wasn't neutral. It was loaded. I didn't know what I'd done wrong, only that I was guilty of it already in her mind. And worse, I could see the slow way her ice was creeping toward my parents, too. "Oh, Amanda's just so sweet," my mom said as we said goodbye. "I can't wait to go dress shopping with her." I had never been invited. Ethan hugged me tightly on the porch, his cheek brushing mine. "Thanks for coming. She just takes a little warming up to. She's shy around new people." I pulled back and forced a smile. "I'm not new, Ethan." He blinked, caught, and for a flicker of a moment something passed between us like that childhood afternoon again, like he could see something was wrong. But the moment passed, and she called to him from the car, and he left. 2 nights later, the porch light buzzed faintly above us, casting our shadows long across the steps. Ethan leaned on the railing, one foot on the lower stair, like he used to when we were kids sneaking sodas late at night. The cicadas chirred in the trees, loud and endless, a Texas lullaby I'd long since stopped hearing unless something was off. Tonight, something was off. "I wanted to talk to you privately," he said, glancing toward the front door where Amanda had disappeared inside just moments ago. "Before she, gets anxious." There it was again, that pause, that subtle dodge of truth. I nodded, arms crossed against the humid air. "Okay, what's up?" Ethan scratched his neck the way he always did when he was stalling. "So, the wedding, you know how much everything's costing these days." I said nothing, waiting. He sighed. "Amanda's parents are doing their best, but things are tight. And I just thought, well, since you're in a good spot right now, maybe." There it was, the ask. He didn't say it directly. He didn't need to. "You want me to help cover the deposit?" I said gently, more a statement than a question. Ethan looked relieved that I'd said it for him. "Yeah, just the venue deposit. It's the biggest chunk up front, and you're the only one I trust with this." He smiled, and for a moment I saw the boy who once stood between me and our parents' anger, shouting that I hadn't broken the lamp. That boy still lived in him, but he was quieter now. "I can help," I said, and I meant it. "Of course I can help." His shoulders dropped in relief. "Thank you, Jules. I didn't want to make it weird." "It's not weird," I lied. "It's family." I watched him grin, already pulling out his phone to send me the details, already moving past the moment like it had been nothing at all. But something fluttered inside me, something faint and uneasy. It wasn't the money. I was doing well. My job at the engineering firm had been steady, and my last promotion came with enough padding to cover a dozen wedding deposits if I wanted. That wasn't the issue. It was the quiet part, the part Ethan didn't say. Amanda's family was tight. His tone suggested strain, maybe even embarrassment. But what about ours? Why hadn't he asked Mom and Dad? And more importantly, why had he asked me in secret? "You're the only one I trust with this." I kept hearing that part. Trust, yes. But also privacy, silence, the weight of obligation with no witnesses. As I transferred the deposit to the account he texted over, I felt it again, that invisible knot tightening. Like I was volunteering for something I didn't fully understand. Like I just stepped into a role that wasn't mine but had always been waiting. I told myself it was just a favor, that it meant something to help Ethan, that he had defended me once, and this was simply love circling back. But as I lay in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and wondered why it didn't feel like generosity. It felt like debt, like I'd just bought myself a seat at a table where I already knew the chair might vanish beneath me at any moment. Still, when my phone buzzed with Ethan's thank you text, followed by a selfie of him and Amanda holding hands beneath fairy lights with the caption "Booked it," I smiled. Because sometimes you want to believe that loyalty is enough, that it runs both ways. Even when you know it doesn't always. The house didn't feel like home anymore. At first, it was just quieter. Ethan had flown off to the Sahara for that geology project, something about rare sediment samples and a once-in-a-lifetime dig. He hugged me tight at the airport, kissed the top of my head like he always did, and said, "Keep the place from falling apart while I'm gone, okay?" I laughed. If only I'd known. 3 days later, Amanda moved in. No conversation. No heads up. Just a text from Ethan. "Hey, is it okay if Amanda stays at the house while I'm away? Just for the quiet and space. She gets anxious alone at her apartment." I'd stared at the message for a long time before replying. Of course, happy to help. Because that's who I was, still trying to be agreeable, still trying to believe this would pass. That this was all just wedding stress, and not the beginning of something more permanent, more corrosive. It started small, as these things always do. She rearranged the living room for better energy flow, moving the couch that had belonged to our grandparents and tucking away the books I kept out on the coffee table. She left her tea bags drying on the kitchen counter like botanical roadkill, the fridge filled with almond milk and keto snacks, and the scent of her lilac body spray lingered long after she left a room. I could have lived with all of that. What I couldn't live with was the constant, low-grade undermining. "Sorry, didn't know you were such an early riser," she said one morning after using the last of my coffee beans again. "I just assumed your car was like community property," she tossed over her shoulder after I caught her with my keys in hand. "This kitchen is really cute, like vintage cute you haven't remodeled." That one was the worst. My kitchen, the one I'd saved up for, chosen tile samples for, laid out every detail with pride and care. I started locking my bedroom door again. Like I used to when I lived with roommates after college, except those women had been kinder. And still I stayed civil, because I told myself, "You're just tired. She's under pressure, be the bigger person." But then came the car. It was a Tuesday morning and I had a client meeting an hour away. I came downstairs to find Amanda in the driveway, my keys in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat. The trunk already open. I blinked, thinking I must be hallucinating. "Amanda," I said, stepping out onto the porch. "Where are you going with my car?" She glanced at me annoyed. "Just to Target and then lunch with Celine. I texted Ethan about it yesterday." "Okay, but you didn't text me and I have a meeting this morning." She sighed, dramatic, like I was being the unreasonable one. "Well, I didn't know. You're usually just on your laptop or whatever." "Right, working." She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was assessing something, calculating how far she could push. "I'll take an Uber," she said finally, slamming the door shut. "God forbid you share." It wasn't the words, it was the way she said share. Like I was hoarding something, like I was being petty for having boundaries in my own home. But I didn't apologize, I didn't explain. I said very calmly, "This isn't your house to command." Her eyebrows lifted just a bit, but she didn't argue. She picked up her purse and walked past me, her heels clacking against the wood porch like punctuation marks. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I felt something rise up in me that I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not rage, not guilt, just a clean, solid knowing. That I'd drawn a line, that I hadn't let her push me back into that corner of polite silence. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. But the air shifted as she left, like something old had cracked just slightly. And I stood there, still holding my coffee, watching the horizon for a storm I could finally name. It wasn't wedding stress. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was something deeper, and I wasn't going to let it grow in me anymore. Dinners became a war zone of silence, not the loud, slamming doors kind, but the brittle, icy kind that settles in the space between forks scraping porcelain. Amanda sat across from me every evening now, and though we shared food, we shared nothing else. Her glances were curt, her comments clipped. Her body language screamed, "You don't belong here," in the house I had paid off, in the kitchen I had built. It was fascinating in a bleak sort of way, watching someone weaponize politeness. "Oh, I didn't realize you were home already," she'd say, walking in from her boutique workout class, tossing her keys onto the marble counter I'd saved for years to afford. Or, "I used the last of the olive oil, hope that's not a problem." No apology, no replacement. Just the constant, humming presence of condescension. Ethan had been gone for 12 days, and already she'd made herself the center of the house. Worse, our parents were beginning to orbit around her like she had her own gravitational pull. "I just love her taste," my mother cooed one evening as Amanda showed her a mood board of potential centerpiece ideas for the wedding. "She brings such elegance." I stood in the doorway, invisible. No one noticed that I de-cooked the dinner they were all eating. Later, when my father dropped by with Amanda's favorite chocolate cake, something I didn't even know he remembered how to buy, I nearly laughed out loud. "Thought I'd surprise our bride-to-be," he said, kissing Amanda's cheek. As if she'd been born into the family instead of pushed into it like a shiny new accessory. I washed the dishes while they all gathered in the living room, laughing at some reality show I'd never watch, and I realized something cold and undeniable. I was being edged out. Gently. Quietly. But it was happening. I started writing things down. It felt strange at first, this impulse to document, like I was keeping a record of shadows, but the more I wrote, the clearer everything became. The dates, the tone of her voice, the exact wording of the remarks that made my stomach twist. September 3rd. "Some people just don't understand how hard it is to be in love," said with a smile while looking straight at me. September 4th. Took the guest towel from my bathroom. Left mine damp and crumpled on the counter. September 7th. Told Mom that I prefer being alone after I declined a last-minute invite to Amanda's bridal salon appointment that I hadn't been told about. Each entry was small, insignificant on its own, but together they painted something unmistakable, a quiet campaign of erasure, a slow, deliberate stripping of my place in this family. I tried to push the bitterness down, but it kept surfacing, especially when I noticed the shift in my parents. They were softer with her now, more attentive. My mother brought her a basket of wedding prep snacks, complete with handwritten labels. My father offered to help hang new curtains in her room. Never once had he offered to help me with the dozens of DIY projects I'd tackled on this house. I became a bystander in my own life, and no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed. Maybe they were simply okay with it, but I was, not anymore. I did confront Amanda, not yet. That would have given her too much. She thrived on control, on getting a reaction, so I did the opposite. I got organized. I kept smiling. I wrote it all down, every rolled eye, every insult slipped beneath the radar, every instance of my parents choosing to look away, because some part of me knew I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't being dramatic, and one day soon I'd need to prove it. The waiting room smelled like citrus and sage, soft and clean, like a whisper instead of a statement. I sat there on the edge of a beige sofa, clutching a paper form I'd already filled out but refused to hand over just yet. I wasn't even sure why I was here. I'd Googled therapists in Austin 3 nights ago after Amanda called me territorial during dinner because I'd labeled the pantry shelves. My mother had laughed. My father had nodded. And I'd gone to my room and cried behind a locked door again like I was 16. So I booked the appointment. Dr. Langley's name had popped up with glowing reviews. "Gentle but firm," one said. Like talking to someone who knew the story before you told it. That stuck with me. When she opened the door to call me in, she looked exactly how I'd hoped. Silver-streaked hair in a low braid, wire-rimmed glasses, a denim blazer over a flowy linen dress. The kind of woman who has definitely baked a pie from scratch in the last week and used it to diffuse a fight. "Julia," she asked, smiling like she already knew I was going to lie about how I felt. I followed her into the office. We didn't start with the drama. She asked about my work first. My routines. What I do for rest. I told her about my project manager role, about the early mornings and color-coded spreadsheets, about how I always keep a list but lately forget to check it. "You sound very capable," she said. I let out a short laugh. "Capable's a nice word." She didn't interrupt, just waited. Eventually, I cracked. I told her about Amanda. I told her how things had shifted from awkward to hostile in a matter of weeks, how the air in the house had changed, how I didn't know what I'd done to deserve being frozen out of my own family's warmth, but somehow I was always the one left outside. I expected her to ask about Amanda's behavior, maybe even suggest confrontation. Instead, she leaned forward and asked gently, "When did you learn that silence was safer than speaking?" The question sucked the breath right out of me, because I knew exactly when. "That day with the lamp," I whispered. "I was 9. My cousins broke it, but my parents blamed me. Ethan tried to defend me, and they shut him down too. I just stood there. And I remember thinking it's better to stay quiet than be told you're wrong again." Dr. Langley nodded. "You learned early that your truth didn't have value unless someone else vouched for it." My chest felt tight. And now it's happening again. Only this time I'm not 9. I own the house. I paid for the dinnerware Amanda keeps chipping. "And yet," she asked, "I still feel like the intruder." We sat with that for a moment. Then she said something that made the air shift. "This isn't about them. It's about your voice. You've been trained to whisper when they shout." I blinked. "You've confused tolerance with peace," she added. "But what you're practicing isn't peace, it's self-erasure." I didn't cry. I thought I might. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly, like a part of me had been waiting for someone to say those exact words, to name what I hadn't been able to name myself. That night back home, I pulled out a new notebook and started a journal. Not about Amanda, not about my parents, but about me. My voice, my anger, my boundaries. I wrote about the lamp. About the ache of being blamed. About Ethan's arms wrapped around my shoulders afterwards, saying, "I know it wasn't you." I wrote about the way Amanda looked at me like I was temporary. The way my mother's affection had a shelf life whenever another woman entered the picture. And for the first time, I didn't edit it. I didn't apologize to the page. I just wrote. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was breath. It was truth. And I wasn't going to whisper anymore. The message sat on my screen for an hour before I hit send. Not because I didn't know what to say, no, I'd known for weeks, but because putting it into words felt like setting off a flare. And I wasn't sure yet if Ethan would come running or turn away from the light. I started with "Hey," deleted it, then wrote, "I've been trying to stay neutral, but things are really tense here. Amanda's behavior toward me has become increasingly hostile. It's affecting my ability to feel safe and respected in my own home. I thought maybe it would pass, but it hasn't. I've been documenting incidents. I wanted to let you know before things escalate any further." I stared at it, read it 3 times, then added, "I love you, Ethan, but this can't continue," and sent it. Immediately, my stomach dropped into my shoes. I locked my phone in the drawer like it was a cursed object and went downstairs to make tea, anything to not sit there and watch the delivered turn to read. But by the time the kettle whistled, he'd replied. One message. "Let's talk when I'm back." No questions, no reassurance. No, "I'm sorry you're feeling this way." Just a placeholder, a postponement. I stood there, tea bag dangling in my hand, steam curling up toward my face as I felt my body go cold. "Let's talk when I'm back." I'd expected more. No, I'd hoped for more. I'd hoped that maybe the brother who once defended me would rise again. Instead, he'd opted for diplomacy. And in the vacuum left by his silence, Amanda sharpened her knives. 2 days later at Sunday dinner, she accused me, flat out, of trying to sabotage the wedding. My parents were there. All of us crammed into the dining room, my mother ladling out soup like it was still 1998 and nothing had changed. and suddenly Amanda set her spoon down and said it with a smile. Some people in this house would rather ruin a wedding than admit they're not the center of it. The room froze. I looked up slowly. "Excuse me," she shrugged, all innocence and malice. "It's just some people thrive on control, and when they lose it, they start drama." My father cleared his throat. My mother looked at the wall like it had suddenly grown fascinating. I turned to them. "You're hearing this, right?" But my mother only offered a thin smile. "Amanda's under a lot of pressure. Maybe we should all be more supportive." Supportive of her. "I've been supportive," I said, my voice low but clear. "I helped pay for this wedding. I've hosted her. I've cooked for her. I've endured weeks of disrespect in silence. What exactly would you like me to do next? Leave my own house?" Amanda leaned back in her chair, victorious, and my mother reached out and patted her hand. "I know this hasn't been easy, sweetie," she said to Amanda, "but you've handled it so gracefully." Something snapped inside me then. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet click of a lock inside a door that would never be opened again. After dinner, I packed a bag, just a small one, essentials, a week's worth of clothes, my charger, my journal. I didn't leave, not yet. But I needed to be ready, because something was shifting, not in them, in me, and I wasn't going to stay where I wasn't seen. It happened on a Sunday. Funny how these things always do on the quiet days when you least expect to be torn apart. My mother had made meatloaf like it was still a comfort food, like we could pretend everything on the table was made from something other than tension. My father sat at the head of the table, silent and unreadable. Amanda buttered her roll with such practiced precision that you'd think it was a televised competition. And I kept my eyes on my plate, counting each breath like it was a tiny act of survival. The air crackled with something unspoken, until Amanda spoke it. "You shouldn't come to the wedding." The words dropped like silverware. I looked up, startled, half expecting a smirk, a joke, a just kidding, but her face was calm, almost serene. "I mean it," she said, sipping her water. "It would be too tense. I don't want the day ruined." No one moved, no one said a word. I turned to my mother, hoping she'd intervene, that she'd say, "That's ridiculous, of course Julia will be there," that she'd protect me even just once. But she didn't. She shifted in her seat and said gently, "Maybe it's for the best, honey, just for this time." For this time. My father nodded, not looking at me, not even pretending to fight for me. Amanda reached for the gravy boat, as if this was a perfectly natural transition, as if her words weren't laced with venom. "It's not personal," she added with a thin smile. "I just think your energy would be disruptive." I felt my hands go numb. "Disruptive," I said slowly, carefully. "After everything I've done for you for this wedding." "I didn't ask you to," she replied flatly. My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood, but I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I just stared at the three of them, Amanda, composed and victorious, my mother trying not to look guilty, my father checked out and passive as ever, and realized with startling clarity they had chosen her. Not just now, for weeks, maybe months, maybe from the beginning, and I had let it happen. I'd funded the deposit. I'd opened my home. I'd stayed polite. I'd made myself small to keep the peace, and they'd mistaken it for permission. "I won't fight to attend something I've already been erased from," I said softly. Amanda's smile faltered, just slightly. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came. I walked away. Back to my room, back to my journal, back to the little suitcase I'd packed days before, just in case this moment arrived. I closed the door behind me and locked it. And then I cried. Not the tidy kind of crying you do with tissues and tea. No, this was the ugly, aching kind. The kind where your chest heaves and you forget how to breathe for a while. The kind that feels like it might leave scars. It wasn't just about Amanda. It was about my mother patting her hand. It was about my father looking down instead of at me. It was about a lifetime of being the responsible one, the calm one, the dependable daughter who never made things difficult. And in return, they had discarded me like I was the difficult one all along. I pressed my forehead to the cool edge of my bedroom window, watching the streetlights blur through my tears. Somewhere out there, Ethan was still in the Sahara, completely unaware that the house he'd asked me to watch was being turned into a battlefield. I wanted to text him, to say it happened, to send one line and let it crack the surface. But I didn't. Not yet. That night, I slept with my journal tucked under my pillow like a secret weapon. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I was preparing for war. He looked older. That was my first thought when I opened the door and saw Ethan standing there on the porch, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, sunburn peeling at the bridge of his nose. He looked like someone who had been standing too close to the edge of the earth, weathered, tired, but still somehow steady. "Hey," he said softly. I stood there a second too long, unsure whether to hug him or crumble into his chest like I used to when we were kids and the world felt cruel. Instead, I stepped aside. He entered the house like he remembered it, dropped his bag gently, glanced toward the kitchen where Amanda's coffee mug still sat unwashed. "Where is she?" he asked. "Out," I replied. "Bridal dress fitting with Mom." He nodded like he already knew that answer. We stood in silence for a beat. Then I said, "We need to talk." He followed me into the living room. Same couch, same table. Everything looked the same, but the air between us had shifted. I didn't wait for his questions. I reached for the journal I'd been keeping and handed it to him, already bookmarked to the page where it all began. He read in silence, each entry, each insult, each moment where Amanda had chipped away at me and where our parents had quietly let it happen. When he looked up, his eyes were dark, but not angry, more like stunned. "She told me things were tense," he said finally, "but she said it was wedding nerves, that you were just being territorial." That word again, I stared at him. I wasn't territorial, I was trying to exist in my own home. "I know," he said quickly. "I see that now, it's just, you believed her." He didn't answer, that was answer enough. "I told you what was happening," I said, voice low, "and your response was, 'Let's talk when I'm back.' Like I was exaggerating. Like I wasn't worth urgency." Ethan rubbed his face, weariness settling deeper into his shoulders. I didn't know what to say, I thought maybe it would blow over, I didn't want to believe it was this bad. "But it is," he nodded. "Yeah, I see that now." We sat in silence again, and then like a ripple across a still lake, the moment broke. Ethan pulled out his phone, opened the family group chat, the same one where our parents shared casserole photos and wedding countdowns, and typed something. I didn't try to read over his shoulder. I just watched his face. He hit send, and the silence in the room deepened. A second later, my phone buzzed, one message from Ethan. "Wedding canceled. Please respect our privacy." No explanation, no justification, just finality. My fingers trembled as I held the screen. I looked up at him. "You mean it?" He nodded. "I can't marry someone who tries to erase the people I love." My heart ached with both relief and grief. Because I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't wanted a canceled wedding. I hadn't wanted anyone humiliated. I just wanted to be heard, to be considered, to not be collateral damage in someone else's fairy tale. But Ethan had finally chosen me, and in doing so, something in me unclenched for the first time in months. Then the phone calls started. Mom, Dad, Amanda, even Lee and Madeline, our long-distance cousins who somehow always sniffed out drama like it was perfume on the wind. I didn't answer any of them. Ethan did, a few, mostly to say, "We're fine, give it space." And that night, for the first time in what felt like years, I sat beside my brother on the couch and watched an old sci-fi movie with a bowl of popcorn between us. No tension, no accusations, just us. Two kids from a Texas town who'd weathered a storm neither of us saw coming. And maybe, just maybe, found a way back to each other in the wreckage. The knock came at 8:14 a.m., too early for visitors. Too late to pretend we weren't home. Ethan was still half asleep, shirtless in flannel pants, cradling a mug of coffee when I opened the front door. And there she was, Amanda. Mascara streaking down her cheeks like twin bruises, hair pulled into a tight ponytail that only emphasized how pale her face had become. Her hands were clutched in front of her like she was waiting to be sentenced. Behind her, the street was silent. The world still, like it was holding its breath. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't move. Ethan appeared behind me, one hand on the doorframe, his face unreadable. "She's here to apologize," he said, "and I told her nothing happens unless you accept it." Amanda blinked hard like the words stung. Maybe they did. I stepped aside wordlessly, unsure if I was ready, but knowing I wouldn't let her speak to me on the porch like I was a stray cat she pitied. She stepped in. Not confidently like she used to, like this house was hers to critique. No, this time she moved carefully, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure the floor would catch her weight. We sat in the living room, the same room where she once insulted my Dacre under the guise of tasteful upgrades. Now she looked at the same couch like it was hallowed ground. "I didn't think it would go this far," she began, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater's sleeve. I didn't answer. Ethan stood by the door, arms crossed, silent. Amanda swallowed. "I thought if I made you uncomfortable enough, maybe you'd back off. Maybe you wouldn't come to the wedding. Maybe Ethan would see that I was all he needed." It was all there. The admission, the motive, the raw, petty, brutal truth. "I was scared of losing him," she continued, eyes locked on her lap. "You're so close. He trusts you more than anyone. And God, I couldn't compete with that. I thought if you were out of the picture, he'd fully be mine." She looked up at me then. I didn't realize how wrong I was until he canceled the wedding. I sat still, back straight, hands folded. My heart was racing, but I kept my face calm. "You treated me like I was disposable," I said quietly. "And my parents let you." Amanda nodded quickly, like she'd been waiting for me to say it. "They did. I don't think they meant to, but they did. I was the bride, the project, the future. You were in the way." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice, because this wasn't about vengeance. This was about clarity. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come here today?" "Because he told me nothing moves forward unless you accept my apology," she said, glancing toward Ethan. "And I told her I'm not marrying someone who tries to isolate my sister," Ethan added. "If she wants this to work, she has to face what she did." Amanda pulled something from her purse then. A letter, folded, creased. The ink smudged in places. She handed it to me. "I wrote it last night," she said. "It's everything. All of it, not excuses, just truth." I took the letter but didn't open it, not yet. Amanda rose to her feet, her voice trembling now. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to look you in the eye and say I'm sorry for trying to erase you." She turned to Ethan. "I was wrong about her, about everything." He said nothing, only nodded. And then she left without another word. The door clicked softly behind her. I stared down at the letter in my hands. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could trust her or if anything between us would ever feel clean. But in that moment, for the first time, I saw her not as an enemy, but as someone who had finally been humbled by the truth. And maybe that was enough for now. It felt like a performance. The table was set for 6. Cloth napkins, polished silverware, Mom's favorite wine chilled in its glass cradle. Amanda had brought a pie pecan, homemade, still warm. I'd caught the scent before I even made it to the front door. Everyone was already seated when I arrived. Amanda looked like she hadn't slept in days. My mother wore pearls and avoidance like matching accessories. My father had his arms crossed so tight it looked like he was holding himself in place. Ethan, the only one who dared to set the whole house on fire, sat straight-backed at the center, stone-faced, still ready. I hesitated in the doorway. Ethan stood. "Sit beside me," he said. Not asked, said. I did, not out of comfort, but out of curiosity. I needed to see what this was. Dinner began with the usual small talk, whether Amanda complimenting the salad dressing like it was a truce offering. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. My silence said everything. Halfway through the meal, Ethan set down his fork. The air shifted. "If you love me," he said, his voice calm but sharp, "you love my sister, period." No one breathed. Amanda's fork paused midair. My mother blinked, her glass halfway to her lips. My father tilted his head, brows drawn in quiet confusion. Ethan turned toward them, his words deliberate now. "This isn't up for negotiation. If you want me at your table, you make room for Julia. If you want Amanda to be part of this family, then she accepts that I already have one." His gaze drifted to me, steady. "And if any of that's too hard, I'll leave with her. I'll build my own family elsewhere. But I won't watch this one eat itself just because it's easier to exclude the one person who's never stopped showing up." Amanda's breath hitched. My mother's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought the silence would crack the walls. Then, softly, awkwardly, my mother said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't grand. It wasn't tearful. It sounded like the first time she'd ever tasted the words and didn't quite know how to swallow them. My father nodded slowly. "We didn't see it." "You didn't want to," I replied. He didn't argue. Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a letter, no envelope this time. "I already gave you a copy," she said to me, "but I brought another. In case you want to read it aloud or throw it in the fire, whatever feels right." She placed it gently in front of me like an offering. I didn't touch it, not yet. Amanda's voice trembled. "I've made so many mistakes. I thought this wedding was about proving something, about claiming something. But I forgot it was supposed to be about building something. And I can't build anything without learning how to make space. For you," she stood, and then unexpectedly stepped around the table and hugged me. Not tight, not long, but real. I didn't hug her back, not because I hated her, but because some wounds deserve their own timing, and mine wasn't finished healing. She stepped back, eyes glassy, voice trembling. "You don't have to forgive me, but I'm asking if you'll let me try again." I looked at her, and then I looked around the table, at my brother unshaken, at my mother quiet for once, at my father suddenly older than I remembered. And I nodded, not because they needed me to, but because I needed me to. I needed to prove that all my silence, all my patience, all my hurt had led to this moment, not of erasure, but of recognition, not of surrender, but of choice. Something in my chest softened, not dissolved, not healed, but shifted. Amanda returned to her seat. Ethan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I didn't cry, but for the first time in a long time, I almost did. The second wedding felt like a different universe. Gone were the endless floral mood boards and the ivory drama. No tension humming beneath the tablecloths. No territorial glances across the dinner table. This time, the celebration didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a beginning. Amanda had insisted on a smaller guest list. "Just the people who have actually been there," she said, holding my gaze when she said it. The venue was a sunlit vineyard outside Austin, wrapped in warm wind and late spring blooms. Simple white chairs curved around an arch made of reclaimed wood and eucalyptus. Nothing fussy, just people, light, and truth. And this time, I was in the planning group chat. I nearly dropped my phone the first time Amanda added me. At first, I figured it was a mistake. Then she sent a message just to me. "You know how to make things run smooth, and I want this to feel like peace, not performance." I said yes, not because I owed her, but because she asked. And when people ask, not demand, something inside you can relax. Our parents were different now too, subtle but noticeable. My mother brought me a dress to try on for the ceremony, not Amanda's colors, but mine. "Wear what makes you feel beautiful," she said, patting the soft satin with a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. My father asked me to help him with his tie, not because he didn't know how, but because he remembered I used to do it for him as a little girl. They were trying, and trying counts. At the rehearsal dinner, Amanda raised a toast, simple, nervous, but sincere. "I didn't know I needed a sister until I almost lost one," she said, her voice catching. "But now I know I have one, whether she forgives me completely or not." There were tears, not just mine. Ethan leaned over during dessert and said, "I still don't know what I did to deserve you showing up for me through all that." I smiled. "You grew up defending me. You just forgot for a while." He reached into his suit jacket and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single photo, us at ages 7 and 9, sitting on the porch, a popsicle in his hand and an oversized cowboy hat on mine. "I found it in Mom's old boxes," he said. "You've always been the strongest one. I just needed to remember how much that strength taught me." We hugged, not like we were trying to prove anything, just because it felt right. At the reception, the music was easygoing. The food, barbecue and peach cobbler, tasted like roots and memory. People danced, people laughed, and Amanda. Amanda clinked glasses with me during the cake cutting and said, "If I overstep again, just look at me like you did that morning with the car keys. I'll get the message." I chuckled, not because it was funny, but because somehow, against all odds, this woman who once tried to erase me was now inviting me to hold her accountable. That's something, that's growth, and it's more than most people get. So I chose to stay, not because everything was perfect, but because we had all finally stopped pretending. Years later, I stood behind a podium at the Austin Women's Leadership Gala, the lights warm on my face, the clink of champagne glasses behind me, and the quiet murmur of 100 voices fading as I cleared my throat. "I never thought I'd be standing here with her," I said, tilting my head toward the woman beside me. Amanda laughed softly and took a step forward, dressed in a navy jumpsuit and confidence. Not performative this time, but real. But sometimes, I continued, life throws you the most unexpected gifts in the most uncomfortable wrapping. The audience chuckled. The banner above us read, "Rise Together, Empowering Women Through Conflict and Connection." It was the name of our nonprofit. Amanda and I co-founded it 2 years after her wedding, our second attempt at it. It started small. A mentorship circle for women navigating difficult family dynamics. Then it grew grants, speaking engagements, panels. 2 of us side by side, not because we'd erased the past, but because we'd built something stronger on top of it. Amanda took the mic next. "We get asked all the time, how did you two go from rivals to partners?" she said. "And my answer is simple, I stopped needing to win." She paused, and Julia stopped whispering. The crowd hummed, nodding. Amanda turned to me. "You taught me that accountability doesn't end a relationship, it's the start of an honest one." I smiled, not for show, for real. After the applause, Ethan joined us on stage with his usual goofy grin and a glass of something sparkling. "These two used to nearly kill each other over kitchen counters," he said, raising his voice over the laughter that followed, "and now they run a whole empire of empathy." He turned to me and added, "Told you she'd change the world, just didn't know she'd do it with you." Amanda winked at him. "Me neither." Later, while everyone mingled, I stepped out onto the terrace to catch a breath of cool air. The city lights glittered below and the moon hung full and steady above. Amanda joined me, 2 flutes of ginger champagne in hand. "To surviving," she said, offering one to me. I shook my head. "To thriving." We clinked glasses. She glanced at me. "Do you ever regret forgiving me?" The question caught me off guard, but not because I hadn't asked it myself over the years. "I didn't forgive you that night," I said honestly. "Not completely, maybe not even halfway." Amanda nodded. "Fair. But I let the door stay open," I continued. "And you walked through it." We stood in silence after that, comfortable now. The kind that comes not from forgetting pain, but from honoring it. The nonprofit had become more than a project. It was a mission, a testimony, proof that repair is possible, but only if both people are willing to look at the wreckage and say, "I helped cause this." And more importantly, I want to help rebuild it. At the end of the night, as the venue emptied and the fairy lights blinked tired above us, Ethan pulled me into a hug so tight it nearly lifted me off the ground. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. I believed him this time, because now I was proud of me too. And that's the thing about dignity. Once you defend it, once you truly own it, the world starts making space for you, even in places you were once pushed out of. Especially there. If you've ever had to reclaim your space, your voice, your worth, especially in your own family, drop a seedling in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about resilience, reckoning, and rising. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't revenge at all, it's growth. Until next time.